So, welcome everyone to another episode in our podcast series. It's called A National Conversation for Scotland. And in that series, we're looking at ways in which Scots can talk to Scots about what they want for our country, what values we want it to be based on, best ways for going forward to achieve that. And we talked to Leanne Wood about how they've made a start on that conversation in Wales. We talked to Gordon McIntyre Kemp about the ideas that have come out from the Believe in Scotland campaigning group, also with ideas of taking that forward. But yes, you have a conversation by talking to people, but you can also just be in communication with people in different kinds of ways. And for example, humour is one of them. So we recently talked to Greg Moody, who's a cartoonist, a well-known cartoonist for the independence movement, about cartoons, political cartoons. Do they change people's minds? They make us laugh, but do they make us think differently? So if you haven't listened or watched that podcast, have a look on it. It's on our website. It's on our YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be looking at another way in which we can communicate with each other and spread ideas, and that's through film. So we're going to be talking to Charlie Stuart, who's a filmmaker. Charlie's made films with Leslie Riddoch, and he's recently just completed a film called Still Yes, Grassroots Politics for Indie. He got it done in time for the 10th anniversary of that referendum campaign. If any of you were at any of the events on Wednesday evening, or if you were watching from home, you may have seen a little clip from that film. It's now available on his YouTube channel. We'll put the link up for it later on. But we wanted to talk to Charlie about, find out his ideas for film and how it can communicate people, what effect it has, how he got into doing it in the first place. So hope you enjoy this one. Here it is.
And tell us about the Leslie Riddoch movies that you did, because the Denmark, and do the Estonia one as well?
Yes,
was it Denmark? They are both just such emotional, inspirational videos. I mean, I must have seen them both about half a dozen times anyway, sometimes in halls and on YouTube. Yeah. But how did you get involved with those?
Well, I've known Leslie for a long time, and I don't think we worked on anything in BBC Days together, but we've done a lot of stuff. I can remember doing something about the Tay Road Bridge. We did stuff for Alan Smith, the MP. So we've done a few things over the years, and I can't remember exactly what the stimulus was, but we certainly started on Estonia, which was just as COVID was beginning. So yeah, that was done in unusual circumstances because we had raised enough money to go out to Estonia on a recce, basically to try and identify good speakers and so on, which I think had in some of the earlier ones that she'd done were just done much more ad hoc than that. And Leslie said, well, why don't you just come out on the recce anyway? And I took a tiny little camera. We did interviewed some people there and then, including Mart Lahr, who was the first president of Estonia, just because we were there. And then COVID hit, and we had to kind of set all that stuff aside and finish the thing with the aid of a Scottish guy who's out in Estonia, and making use of video calls with it. So it was unusual Estonia. Looking back on that one, I think one of the things that, funny enough, gives it a lot of atmosphere is the music which came from Estonian duo. And the Estonian cultural attaché is a great friend of Scotland, and she comes up to Celtic Connections every year. And she had invited myself to go and see this Estonian duo in Glasgow, which I did. And these two remarkable young ladies who play a kind of Zimmer type thing on their knees, sharing one end of this kind of instrument meant for one person. So one of the girls plays one end and the other plays another end. But that music, I think, gave a tremendous atmosphere. It was very unusual, sometimes hypnotic, sometimes depressing, and we were lucky that that fitted so well, I think. So that was Estonia. It got still has a big viewing figure on YouTube, I think, because people became very aware of Estonia's vulnerability with the recent Russian thing. So
yes, and also the whole singing revolution, I think, just catches the imagination, and it almost is kind of what we're looking at, that kind of grassroots people-led movement. It's not a political party doing the running.
Yeah.
It's people.
Yeah, and listen to what they say. There was an activist in there, a wonderful lady, and she said, people thought it happened out of nowhere, but they had been doing the preparation behind the scenes for a long time, sorting out how they would go forward, what were the kind of principles they would take, and all the sorts of behind the scenes thing, kind of committee work and arguing and the like. It had all been done behind the scenes, and to some extent was ready to go. And then, as Mark Lahr said, you've got to take that opportunity when it's there. And when there is an opportunity, you go for it, and don't hum and haw and whatever. So one of the things, hopefully we'll talk a bit more about the film I'm making just now later, but one of the phases I'm into with that now is it's mainly about grassroots politics, but of course you can't just leave it hanging there. So I've got 3 commentators who give their opinions on where we are with grassroots and where it could go, and are we in another 10 years going to be back looking at another 10 years of grassroots politics when nothing happened, And one of the themes in that is very definitely exactly the same thing, that there's a lot of background work that needs to be done still. You can't just stare dreamily out the window and wish for the day that something is going to come. There's a lot of groundwork that can be done, not necessarily by politicians. So we got a lot to learn from Estonia. And then the speed of transition, of course, when they did get going, was quite breathtaking.
Yeah, and that does seem to happen, doesn't it? So I remember I was in Germany having a weekend with a friend. The weekend the Berlin Wall came down, and we just had absolutely no idea that it was going to happen. And another friend had come through and said, "Oh, I'm heading over to Berlin to get a bit of the wall." And we were going, "What do you mean get a bit of the wall?" And it was because, and that was just sort of like that. But so, do you want to tell us a bit about the movie you're doing just now?
Well, it came from the realization that the 10th anniversary was coming up, and so earlier in the year, I realized that there wasn't really, at that time, there weren't really any plans to market in any way. And some of the people I spoke to originally said, "Oh, people are not going to want to, they're not going to want to celebrate. That's not, we don't want to be thinking about it." And then also the general election was called suddenly. And I really wondered and worried about how that would change the flavour of things. So it kind of, nothing happened then, and then things are happening very suddenly. But the idea has always been, still is, to look at who are the grassroots, who are these people, what are they doing, what keeps them going, what are their hopes and aspirations for the future, all of that. So that's basically what I've been doing. Didn't want any politicians involved. There aren't any proper politicians involved at all. So the aspiration was try to get a different case study, as we call them, for each of the 10 years. And I think we've got the 10. I'm not sure. We might have to split one into 2 to actually get even 10.
So what do you mean when you say 10 case studies?
Still, the challenge I'm facing in the next couple of weeks is to, how do you make this, rather than just a montage of different people doing roughly the same thing and saying roughly similar things, how do you separate them out? How do you give it a kind of like storyline, a kind of spine, if you like? So one of the thoughts was something like a countdown. So you'd go 10 years ago, number 10 is this, and then you'd basically it was just a device really for separating them out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, another device which is going to be in there to some extent is to punctuate it with some of the major political things that happened. So, you know, the European vote would be a big thing. So, you know, when we start off in the shadow of this really depressing no vote, and then, you know, very shortly after there's the European thing, and so there were things like that, and then Boris, and there were a few things there which made everybody think, oh, you know, another referendum might be closer than we think. And then, of course, Theresa May comes along and says, you know, now is not the time. And so it's hard to avoid those points.
I think it's really good to include those, because I think that, you know, maybe it is just social media, but certainly within the Yes movement, there's a lot of, well, you mentioned the Estonians talking about don't hum and haw about things, take the opportunity when it's there. So there's a lot of, you know, statements that you hear, well, you know, the SNP didn't take the opportunities, Nicola held things back, or she didn't move forward. And now I'm not suggesting for a minute that either the SNP or Nicola Sturgeon were perfect in how they dealt with things. But when I hear that, I always think, well, okay, there was 2015 when suddenly there was, what was it, over 50 SNP MPs down in Westminster. That was an opportunity, right? The next year there was the Brexit, and then the wrong side won. Well, I think, and then there was 3 years of a pretty well paralysed House of Commons trying to work out what to do with that, and then Boris Johnson, and then COVID. So now. And again, maybe more could have been done even within all that. But God, it wasn't an easy, that sort of 6 or 7 years was not easy politically to try and do anything, I think, in very, you know, fast or maybe even very forcefully. But so I'm quite pleased that you've got it in there. However, having said that, all the way through that, there's been a quite, you know, there's been parts of the Yes movement have just carried on, and they carried on doing things and putting things on, and other groups have, you know, stepped back a wee bit. But, you know, the other group I'm in is Pensioners for Indy, and there's a team in Glasgow and there's another team in Edinburgh who are out every week on the street running stalls. So, you know, it's pretty vibrant in some ways and a bit subdued and, you know, maybe a bit depressed in other ways.
The fact that the independent support is at 50% and the SNP's at 30%, that divergence is quite, you know, is a new development, I think, compared to where we've been maybe for the first 8 or so of those 10 years. Is that something you're finding with the people you're speaking to? Are you seeing this divergence growing? Is it becoming more of a grassroots movement?
I think, you know, one of the big things that comes through is a complete disconnect between the grassroots and politics. Yeah, quite. I think as an outsider, you would have to say that, you know, it's really surprising. And as somebody points out in this, you know, just at the point that there was a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about the prospect of independence again. And there were huge marches. If you can remember the really big march in Edinburgh.
We were on it.
Yeah. There were no politicians at the head of that. You know, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon didn't appear on any at all. You know, and I think that was a mistake, to just completely, literally turn your back on the grassroots movement. Even if it was just, you know, a token gesture of being there, I think would have seemed to be more of a connection. I think that's definitely a striking thing, that it's almost like grassroots support continues despite the politicians, you know, all the things that they've been doing to shoot themselves in the foot. And I mean, you mentioned Pensioners for Independence, and I did do a lovely little scene in Selkirk with Selkirk Pensioners for Independence, who are running a corner shop, a pop-up shop, and there are around 4 or 5 people who came along to organise it. I think out of those, 2 of them were actually English. And they all claim to have different political allegiances, you know. So it just goes to show how the people who make up the grassroots are really diverse, and it doesn't surprise me at all that there's that big gap between support for independence and support for the SNP.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that Gordon McIntyre Kemp and Believe in Scotland are focusing in on, is that I think Gordon has said he'd studied independence movements around the world wherever he could find them. He said it was never political parties that were leading them. It was always the grassroots. And I think that's where the kind of work that you're doing, the art side of things, the cultural side of things becomes really important, because you can kind of engage and energize people, I think, really well with that kind of cultural thing. And you know, the other movie in that space, of course, Jane McAllister and To See Ourselves, that as well is sort of grassroots perspective. It's not political, party political. It's just about ordinary people like us. And I think there is something in the work that you're doing that's kind of reflecting the movement back to itself almost, and saying, look, this is the strength of ordinary people with a vision for something.
Yeah. Do you think, in terms of how you get there's a work that you're doing just now, the project that you're doing just now. So do you think, in terms of how you can get that, outside of the Yes bubble, as it were, or because that's the other thing that's so frustrating about media, isn't it? Like the big media are just either not interested or will do a lot to downplay anything that's happening in the indie movement. Do you think about how to get that out?
Yeah, I think it's all of the social media, but particularly YouTube, I think, is the thing that it's hard for the establishment, if you want to use that conspiratorial kind of term. It's hard for them to slap down because you're out there. And YouTube are really only concerned with the numbers of viewers you get. And once you get to a certain tipping point with YouTube, then they start to suggest your work to other people who are interested in the similar thing. And that algorithm can be quite wide. And as Leslie says, I mean, you just need to. The other film we made with Leslie, the Denmark film, is currently sitting just under 1 million views on YouTube, and that's not people from Scotland. That's because it's been recommended to people who are interested in wider, kind of kind of movements. And Leslie always says, don't underestimate how interested people are in Scottish politics. So I think it is just getting across that threshold where the thing starts to really roll and gather momentum.
Yeah, that is absolutely what we're finding as well. I mean, one of our best performing videos, ironically, was us interviewing Leslie about the Denmark film, and quite a lot of the comments that came under it was Danish people going, "Oh, we're interested in this, and do you want to know a bit more about this?" And really very positive and helpful kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that gets back to what we were saying earlier on about this being. I mean, I'm a program maker through and through. That's my number one thing, and maybe there needs to be a wee bit more of a kind of infrastructure for people who will commercialize things, so be better at raising money, and B, distributing them. And they're also, if we were here and we weren't talking about independence, we were talking about selling cat food or something, there would be somebody with the job of doing nothing but getting viewership for the film.
Yes.
So I think potentially not potentially, I think there is definitely a need for something, some group or body like that who have that kind of expertise. With the again, talking about the Denmark one, not particularly our film, but there was something that happened in America, and I think one of these right-wing talk shows in America had been dissing Denmark,
for
some misconception about how liberal and communist.
Communist it is.
And the minister that we interviewed in Denmark, he did a rebuttal, basically, a very short sort of thing for YouTube, which in similar to the things we're doing, you know, it started off just with something that was going to be reassuring to people who had Denmark close to their heart. But one way or another, that got to, now it was one of the prominent American politicians. I'm not sure if it was somebody actually in government, or who was the other, who's the left-wing American?
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, whatever it was, somebody who had himself, you know, 30 million subscribers or viewers, you know, got hold of this thing and basically retweeted it, or, you know, copied it or whatever. So that thing, which was made in Denmark, which had initially a very restricted kind of audience, overnight went huge. And we need to be cuter at doing things like that, I think, you know, and sending our videos to a hit list of people, you know, celebrities and so on, who will kind of comment, and you know, whether it's films I make, or whether it's artwork that Greg makes, or, you know, that kind of thing. We just need to be better at exploiting is the word.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have, over maybe the last 6 months or so, we keep coming back to this idea of all this disparate indie media that you've got. I mean, there's bloggers, there's podcasters, there's YouTubers, there's up to filmmakers and authors and artists and photographers, and just so much. If there was some way that we could, without trying to rein anybody in, and without stopping them having the freedom to pursue whatever angle they want, if we had some way of sort of amplifying each other's voices, even with a kind of loose network, in some way that you can say, right, your film's coming out, okay, here's a press release that goes through all the indie media, and we all you know, republish that or something, or, you know, here's a list of half a dozen podcasters you might like, and throw it in. But how to actually get that going is what's kind of stumped us up until now, although we can kind of see the benefit of it. We tried running it past Independence Live, who, again, they're going, oh, well, yeah, it's interesting, but what would you do about this? And what would you do about that? And as soon as you start thinking about the nuts and bolts of how it would work, that's where it all gets very tricky. But I kind of think, you know, half a dozen people around a table could probably thrash something out.
We'd probably do it, yeah.
You could argue that, you know, that's maybe a role that somebody in the SNP could take on, you know, an organisation that's got money and, you know, probably already has people with a lot of those kind of skills and contacts. You know, that would be an easy thing. Well, say easy, but that would be something that could be organised. And it comes down, that kind of thing comes down to money again, because you know, I appreciate that the your thing is not paid. I mean, I can't afford to do things completely for nothing, so I'm getting paid a little bit to be doing this. But the kind of organisation and person or persons we're talking about, it's a competitive world, and they are going to be selling their services to people who sell cat food, you know, because they got to pay, you know, pay a mortgage and so on. I think it's great that an organisation like Believe in Scotland, or Business in Scotland as it started off, exists and has been very successful in the kind of way that it's doing things. So, you know, I found it really surprising how omnipresent the Believe in Scotland messages, posters, artwork.
I'm even wearing the T-shirt right now. There you go. I've just been to my gym class this morning, and I wore that to my gym class because I am a walking advert these days.
Well, exactly. You know, it's kind of, but you know, that is something which, what sets that out as being unique is that it is a professional organisation. You know, with, you know, people are doing it because they are paid, who so it's getting past that kind of keen amateur or, you know, part-time professional sort of thing that has to be something, I think, in the next few years.
I mean, I was like you, I was kind of energized by 2014 rather than actively involved up until then. And I don't really know much about what Yes Scotland, the organisation at the time, did, but that seemed to have quite a significant amount of funding attached to it. So, it seems to me that if whoever's going to be leading the next, well, we don't even know if it's going to be a referendum or an election or whatever it is, there's going to have to be some kind of body with some kind of money. Communications and indie media has got to be a really important strand of anything they do. Otherwise, we're just talking to each other. It's got to be something bigger than that. But I don't know. I mean, the other thing that's I've just come back from the Edinburgh, did a day at the Edinburgh Festival. And one of the things I managed to catch was Stuart McHardy, who's a historian, but does a lot of radical Scottish history kind of. He's a very clear indie supporter. But the publisher, Luath Press, had a whole series of events. And I think they had maybe 3 different venues, and they had perhaps, 30 of their authors, and at every one they had this program of, now we're going to do an hour with this guy, and then you can buy his books and he'll sign them for you. Now we've got another one coming in. I thought that is not complicated to organize, and other than the hire of the rooms, it's not expensive to do, and they must have been worth their while in terms of sales generated. And we've got another year's festival coming up before 2026 with the Holyrood elections. It just seems like a really an opportunity to me. But again, it needs somebody or a group of people to get together and organise. This is the independence part of the festival, because I think we're awfully sort of, oh no, we better not raise it, it's political. Oh, what if they don't want to be associated with independence? Well, it's a viewpoint that half of Scotland shares. It's as valid as the everything else is the unionist viewpoint. Why is that okay and ours isn't?
Yeah. But I think that that there is a kind of self-consciously going to say this, an awful lot of the stuff that we do is talking to ourselves, and this film in large measure is probably just going to do that. That's not a waste of time or effort, because it's things like this that keep the indie movement going. So it both sort of keeps the fire going. It may be, just like the group in Selkirk were saying, they don't necessarily need people to come into the pop-up shop for that to be a success. They just need people to look in the window and realise, oh, that's independence, and still they're pensioners, and I'm a pensioner, and it's still there. So there is a role for just sort of keeping the kind of fire smouldering, if you like, but really to have any kind of effect going forward, we need to get away from this solid block of 50 and get into that next block of 50. And we don't need to convert all 50% of them. I mean, some people say 10%, it's not a huge figure. And I mean, some people have done research. Robin McAlpine reckons that there are 20% of the voting public who are persuadable. They're not kind of really hard fast one way or the other. They've got the reasons that they didn't vote yes the last time, but they are persuadable, if you kind of address their things. So going forward, I think we need to become a wee bit more aware of getting to that audience and talking to their concerns. What are the issues that hold them back? Now, the Denmark film, for example, is kind of in that territory, because you end up with people who watch it. It's an easy watch. So people will watch it who don't, and they're not maybe immediately aware that it's something to do with Scottish independence. But what it is an inspiring thing, because everybody watched it and thinks, God, I wish our country was like that.
Exactly.
So that's the kind of thing. It's that kind of soft pressure into those. Estonia was similar in the way that, there was a country which came from nothing and had a dip, to the point where there weren't petrol for ambulances and no bread in the shops within a few years. So I think we need to to going forward be more strategic in targeting other audiences. Again, that's the challenge of, well, how do you attract an audience like that? Because it's relatively easy when you're talking amongst yourselves. Everybody shares the same Twitter followers and things. So yeah, I think that's where we need to go.
What's your film called, by the way? We didn't. Still yes. I've got a T-shirt with that on it as well. I'll wear that.
Yeah, I've got to thank Leslie for that one, actually.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. As you were speaking there, Charlie, it was just reminding me of it's an interview that Fiona and I did. Well, must be a couple of months at least back now, 2 or 3 months, with Leanne Wood, who was the former leader of Plaid Cymru, and we were talking to her about the Welsh Constitutional Commission. And it just fairly recently a report being sent to the Welsh Senate about it. And so, you know, they had a remit. It was paid for by, you know, Senate resources. Probably came out of there was an informal pact or arrangement between, you know, Plaid Cymru and Labour Party in the Senate. So it was an initiative that came out of that. But, you know, in the end, they had 2 years to go around Wales, having conversations. They had commissioners, and Leanne was one of the commissioners, which was why we were talking to her. But there's lots of other people involved, and they had money, so they could say to local groups, "Look, we'd like to hear of what you think about, you know, possible futures for Wales." And you know, I think there was 4 options. One of them was independence. One was stay as it is now. One was more like Devo Max, and there was another one that I've completely forgotten. But
yeah.
So they just went around, they talked to people, and Leanne said the thing that kind of has stuck with her was that it was a process. Yes, you would go and ask people what they thought, and then you listened. So it was this, you know, 2-year listening exercise, and she said you could see that people then, because they were being asked something and having to think, yeah, what do I think about that? What would be better? How would I like Wales to be a bit different? People then started on their own journey of thinking what the country could be, and then how could we get there? Now they're not all going to come back and say, well, the way to get there is for Wales to be independent. That wasn't the point of it anyway. But it got people starting to think, to look around them, talk to people, and then to think, how could it be better? And one of the options for Scotland might be to do something not necessarily the same, but something similar, whereby we're having conversations with ourselves, and not just the indie movement, but everyone in Scotland. Yeah,
I think you know, there have been efforts like that in the past. I think so. I'm not too sure of the history, so I'm not going to say too much about it. But I think there was some money thrown at an idea like that, and I think I believe in Scotland they've got plans to do something similar. So yeah, I mean, and again, it's the kind of thing that is probably easier for a grassroots, non-aligned movement to do than a political party, because political parties tend to come the other way around, don't they? And they say, this is what we believe, you know? And we're going to try and persuade you to believe that as well. Plenty of publicity at the time, but it's called Still Yes, and it'll be somewhere between half an hour and an hour. I'm trying to keep it shorter to get a wider audience, and I think anybody in the Yes movement is really going to love it. A lot of it will be familiar, some of it inspiring, some of it, you know, some of the criticism, the necessary criticism, I think, is in there from, you know, a range of critical voices. I think we just need to listen to what they're saying. It's not all doom and gloom, you know, it's independence is going to come. Yeah. But, you know.
Yeah, and still yes, and still game.
Yes. Still game. Good, thank you. Good.